You look at these hands sometimes, and you don't even recognize them. They're like a stranger's hands grafted onto the ends of my arms. They're rough, cracked, the skin like old leather no matter how much you try to soften them up. The dirt, it's not dirt you can wash off. It's settled deep in the creases, around the nails, a permanent stain from that place. A map of those 3 years etched right into the skin. Sometimes I'll just sit and stare at them, these old man's hands, and it's like they've got their own memory, a story they want to tell that my mind has tried its best to forget. It starts with the hands I used to have. Seems a lifetime ago. I was a student, can you believe that? In Heidelberg. My hands were smooth then, knew the feel of a book's pages, the weight of a pen, the way a girl's hand would fit into mine on a walk along the Neckar. Her name was Liesel. I remember the softness of her fingers, the way she'd lace them with mine, and my hands felt capable, gentle. They were made for building things, for learning, for holding something precious without crushing it. I used to help my father in his workshop sometimes, a carpenter, and I loved the smell of fresh-cut wood, the smooth grain under my palm after I'd sanded it down. Those hands knew how to create something, to bring a shape out of a raw piece of timber. That feels like a dream now, someone else's life I heard about in a story. It's a strange feeling, this detachment, like that boy with the clean hands and the bright future just vanished one day, and I'm what's left wearing his face. Then the war came, not with a bang for us at first, but with a train ticket and a stiff, new uniform that didn't fit right. We were so young, so damned proud, singing as we rolled east, thinking it would be an adventure over by Christmas. We were going to show the world. I remember looking at my hands then, still clean, resting on my rifle and feeling a thrill. They were a soldier's hands now. What a fool I was. The first thing my hands really learned was the cold. Nothing can prepare you for the cold of Russia. It's a living thing, a beast that bites right through your wool gloves, through your flesh, down to the bone. Your fingers go numb, then they burn, then they go so numb you're afraid to look at them, afraid they might snap off like brittle sticks. We got our first taste of it outside of Moscow, 41. The world had turned white, a blinding, endless white that hurt your eyes. The wind didn't blow, it screamed, a high-pitched whine that never stopped. Digging a foxhole in that ground was like trying to dig into concrete. Your hands would slam the spade down and it would just ring, jarring your whole arm. You'd take turns, 5 minutes each, because any longer and your hands would freeze to the metal. I saw a man do that once. His skin tore right off, left a patch on the shovel handle. We learned to piss on our hands just to feel a moment of warmth, the steam rising in the frigid air. That's when the first cracks appeared, little red fissures that would bleed and never really heal. Your hands became clumsy, fumbling things. Loading a clip, trying to light a cigarette with trembling fingerset was a battle in itself. And the silence. After a shelling, there'd be this ringing in your ears, but underneath it, a silence so heavy you could hear it. That's when you'd hear the other sounds. The moaning, the crying, not from the enemy, from us, from boys calling for their mothers. And your hands, they'd be shaking so bad you couldn't steady them, not from fear alone, but from the cold that had gotten deep inside you into your nervous system, and it never really left. Then came the mud. The Rasputitsa, they called it, the time without roads. It was worse than the cold in its own way. It was a thick, clinging black soup that swallowed everything, boots, trucks, men. It had a smell, God, the smell of it, rot and dampness and something else, something metallic and foul. You'd march through it for hours, and with every step your boots would make a sucking sound as you pulled them free, a sound that still echoes in my dreams. Your hands were always covered in it. You'd try to eat your hardtack, and your fingers would be caked in black slime. You detaste it on the bread, gritty between your teeth. Everything you touched was mud. Your rifle, your face, your letters from home. You try to clean your weapon, your fingers working frantically to scrape the grit out of the bolt, knowing your life depended on this piece of machinery functioning. Your hands learned things then, not from a manual, but from instinct. They learned the exact pressure needed to seat a magazine, the quick, sure motion to clear a jam. They learned how to tear a field dressing open with your teeth and press it against a buddy's wound, feeling the warm blood seep through the gauze onto your fingers. You'd hold it there, your hand applying pressure, while he screamed and begged, and you'd just keep pressing, your hand doing the job your mind couldn't process. That's when the numbness set in, a different kind of numbness. Not from the cold, but from the relentless horror. You'd see things things no man should see, and your hands would just keep moving, digging, loading, fighting. They became tools, instruments of survival, and the boy who used them to hold a girl's hand or turn a page in a book was locked away somewhere deep inside. I remember the first time I killed a man with my hands. It wasn't with a rifle from 100 meters away. It was in a trench during a night attack. It was chaos, shadows grappling in the dark, the smell of sweat and cordite and fear. He was just a shape, a grunting, struggling shape on top of me. I couldn't get my bayonet free. It was stuck in the mud. My hands found his throat. I felt the stubble of his beard against my thumbs, the hard cartilage of his Adam's apple. I squeezed. I squeezed until my hands cramped, until I felt something give way, until his struggles became weak twitches and then stopped. When I pushed him off, my hands were trembling violently. In the faint light of a flare, I saw his face. He was young, maybe younger than me, and my hands, they felt hot. They felt alive with a terrible energy, and yet they felt filthy, contaminated. I wiped them on my trousers over and over, but I couldn't wipe away the feeling. That's a feeling that stays with you. It's in the skin, deep down. You can scrub your hands raw with sand and snow, but that memory is etched into them, a permanent stain alongside the dirt. Your hands also build things. You build friendships with these hands. You share a cigarette with a buddy, your hands cupped against the wind to light it, passing it back and forth. You help him dig his hole when he's too exhausted to lift the shovel. You pat his shoulder when the mail doesn't come, or when a letter from home brings bad news. You learn to read each other's, hence a nervous tap on a rifle stock means he's scared. A steady hand cleaning a weapon means he's found a moment of peace. My best friend was a guy named Klaus, from a farm near Hamburg. Big, strong guy, hands like hams from years of farm work. He could fix anything, had a knack for it. When our MG-34 jammed, it was Klaus's hands that would work on it, calm and sure, while the rest of us panicked. He had a dark sense of humor, said his hands were better at fixing machinery than our officers were at strategy. We de-huddled together for warmth in a dugout, our backs against the frozen earth, and he'd talk about his family's farm, about the feel of rich soil in his hands, not this damned Russian mud. He said when he got back, he was never going to let go of a plow handle again. Then outside of Stalingrad, it was a shell, just a random scream from the sky. One moment he was there, the next. There was just a crater and pieces. I found his hand. I knew it was his because of the thick workman's fingers, the scar across the knuckle from a childhood accident. I just stood there, holding it, this detached piece of my friend. It was still warm. The weight of it, I can still feel the weight of it in my own hands. That's a ghost that never leaves you. Sometimes, when my hands are quiet, I can feel that ghostly sensation, the last grip on a comrade's shoulder, the terrible warm weight of what was left. The retreat, that's a whole different kind of hell. Your hands are always pushing, pulling, dragging. You're dragging a wounded man, your hands hooked under his arms, his blood soaking your sleeves. You're pushing a cart with the last of your unit's ammunition. You're pulling yourself forward on your belly through the snow, every movement an agony. Your hands are frozen claws, your feet blocks of ice. You stop feeling the cold after a while, and that's the most dangerous sign. You just feel tired, so incredibly tired you want to lie down in the snow and sleep. But your hands keep moving, driven by some primal instinct. You learn to start a fire with damp wood, your fingers fumbling with the matches, shielding the tiny flame with your body. You learn to melt snow in your canteen cup over a feeble flame, the warmth of the metal a fleeting comfort. You taste the hunger, a constant gnawing emptiness. Your hands search for anything edibly, a frozen potato from an abandoned field, a piece of bark to chew on. The world shrinks down to the few feet in front of you, to the next step, to the simple, animal functions of your hands. Find food, make fire, hold on. And through it all, there's the shaking. It starts small, a tremor in the fingers. But after years of it, the constant artillery barrages that shake the earth and rattle your teeth, the lack of sleep, the starvation, it gets into your nervous system. My hands, they still tremble, not from fear, not anymore. It's like a deep exhaustion, a vibration that's been set off inside me and never quite dampened. I can be sitting in a quiet room, perfectly calm, and I'll look down and see my hands having a little conversation all their own, a faint, constant tremor. It's the war still echoing in my bones. The doctors said it's shell shock. We just called it being Zermwurp worn down, ground to dust. There's a shame in these hands, there really is. A shame for the things they've done, the things they've seen, the lives they've taken. You look at them and you see the instruments of destruction. But there's a twisted pride, too. A pride that they kept you alive. That they dug the hole that saved you from the shrapnel, that they held the weapon that kept the enemy at bay, that they dragged your friend another 100 meters before you had to leave him. They built and they destroyed, sometimes in the same hour. They've known the intimacy of death and the fierce loyalty of comradeship. They are a contradiction, these hands. When it was finally over, when the surrender came, it wasn't a relief. It was just an end. The fighting stopped. The silence was deafening. One of the first things I did was find a stream. I knelt down and I scrubbed my hands. I scrubbed them with sand, with leaves, with water so cold it made them ache. I scrubbed until the skin was raw and red, trying to wash away the grime of 3 years, the blood, the mud, the memory. But you can't. You look down and you see the dirt is still there, deep in the lines. It's part of you now. The memories are permanent, etched right into you just like the scars from the shrapnel and the frostbite. This one here on my thumb, that's from a piece of a shell casing outside of Kursk. This white, waxy patch on the back of my hand, that's frostbite from the winter of 42. They're like a diary written in a language only I can understand. Now, back in what's left of the world, I try to use these hands for gentle things again. I try to hold a cup of coffee without it rattling. I try to touch a flower, to feel its delicate petals. I try to shake another man's hand without gripping it like I'm trying to prove I'm still here. But it's hard. The gentleness feels foreign, like a language I've forgotten. I sometimes wonder if these hands, after all they've been through, will ever be capable of anything truly gentle again. Can they build something without the ghost of destruction hovering over them? Can they hold something precious without the memory of all the things they've broken? I don't know. Maybe that's the real cost of it all. Not the broken cities or the borders on a map, but the broken men, with strange hands grafted onto their arms, forever trying to wash away a stain that's become part of their skin, forever listening to the stories their own hands whisper back to them from the mud and the snow and the silence. You don't think about your pockets until everything else is gone. The army gives you a pocket for this, a pouch for that, everything accounted for on some quartermaster's clipboard. But your own pockets, the ones in your tunic and your trousers, those are yours. They hold the weight of a different life. For me, that weight was a few precious grams. A dogered photograph of my wife, Anna, standing in front of our apartment building, squinting in the sun. A few letters from her, folded and refolded so many times the paper had gone soft as cloth, like the fabric of her favorite dress. And a small, smooth stone I'd picked up from the shore of the Rhine the day I left. That was it. That was the entirety of my world beyond the mud and the shelling. In the grand scheme of this whole damned war, those items were nothing, less than nothing. But to me, they were heavier and more valuable than a warm meal or a dry pair of socks. You trade a stale crust of black bread for a cigarette, sure, but you wouldn't trade that photograph for a hot steak dinner. Some things just weren't for trading. We all had our little treasures. Klaus had a lock of his little girl's hair, pale as corn silk, tucked into his paybook. Franz had a harmonica, the metal always cold against his lips. These were the things we fought for, not for the fatherland or the Führer, not after a while anyway. Those big ideas got stripped away in the first Russian winter, frozen solid, and left behind in the snow like so much else. What was left was the small stuff, the real stuff. We developed rituals, little ceremonies of sanity. For me, it was the quiet moment just before dawn, that grey, dead time when the world is holding its breath. The sentries were changing, the coffee was brewing, and for a few stolen minutes, the war seemed to pause. I'd find a quiet spot, maybe leaning against the tread of a panzer or hunkered down in my foxhole, and I'd take out the photograph. My fingers, numb with cold, would trace the edge of it. It wasn't just looking, it was a whole journey. I'd stare at Anna's face, at the way she had a little half-smile, like she was sharing a secret with the camera. I'd remember the smell of the linden trees in bloom on our street, the sound of the tram clattering past, the taste of the coffee she'd make, real coffee, not this bitter acorn swill we drank. I'd transport myself out of that frozen hell and back onto that sunny sidewalk. For 60 seconds, I wasn't a soldier. I was just a man, a husband. That was the only thing that kept the fear at bay, if only for a moment. And we shared these fragments of ourselves, too. Sharing a cigarette wasn't just about the nicotine. It was a sacrament. You break a precious piece of chocolate, the wrapper smelling faintly of sweetness and pocket lint, and hand half to the fellow next to you. You didn't say much. You just nod. It was a way of saying, I see you. You're still a human being, and so am I. We became superstitious like old women. Klaus believed his daughter's lock of hair kept him safe from bullets. I knew a fellow who had a lucky coin he'd rub before every attack. Me, I had my stone. I'd roll it in my palm, feeling its cool, smooth surface, and I'd tell myself that as long as I had this little piece of home, I'd make it back. It was a child's fantasy, but you cling to anything when the world is coming apart. You'd hear a shell whistling in, and your hand would dart to your pocket, fingers closing around that photograph or that stone, as if it were a shield. It was the only armor we had that really worked. But there were things we carried that we could never send home, burdens that weighed down our souls more than any pack. I wrote letters in moments of pure despair, sitting in a waterlogged dugout with the smell of damp earth and decay filling my nostrils. I'd pour it all out onto the papered terror of the Katyusha rockets, the scream they made, the sight of men I'd shared a cigarette with just hours before lying broken in the mud, the gnawing, constant cold that felt like it was freezing the very marrow in your bones. I'd write about the emptiness in the eyes of the Russian prisoners, an emptiness I saw starting to reflect in our own. Those letters were too honest, too real. I'd read them over, my hands shaking, and then I'd fold them up and stick them in a different pocket, the one I never opened during my morning ritual. I couldn't send that filth, that despair, back to Anna. She was living in a world of ration coupons and blackout curtains, worrying about me enough. To tell her the truth, it would have been a cruelty. So those letters stayed with me, a secret history of my own breaking point. And then there was the diary. We overran a Russian position one morning, a mess of shattered trees and churned earth. Among the debris, next to a boy who couldn't have been more than 18, I found a small notebook. The cover was stained with mud, or maybe something else. I don't know why I picked it up. Curiosity, maybe, morbid fascination. I couldn't read the Cyrillic script, but tucked inside was a photograph of his family, a stout mother, a stern father, a sister with braids. And on one page, he'd drawn a crude map of a village, with a little star next to one of the houses. Home. It hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some faceless Bolshevik monster. This was a kid, just like the kids in my own unit. He had a mother who worried, a home he dreamed of returning to. He carried a picture, just like I did. We were all just men, dragged into this meat grinder by old men in warm rooms far away. That diary was a heavier burden than any weapon. The heaviest burden of all, though, was a promise. My friend Erich, the squad joker, always talking about the bakery he was going to open after the war, full of sweet pastries. He took a piece of shrapnel during a mortar barrage. It was quick. There was nothing any of us could do. Before we buried him in that cursed Russian soil, I took his personal effects. His wallet with a photo of his parents. A small wooden bird he'd carved for his little sister. It was an unspoken vow, a promise every soldier understood. You take their things and you make sure they get home. It's a sacred duty. But carrying Erich's things, it was like carrying a piece of his ghost. Every time I touched that little wooden bird, I felt the weight of that promise. It was a good weight, a necessary weight, but my God, it was heavy. The single greatest fear, beyond the shells and the charges, was the dread of losing those small items. Losing your rifle meant a court-martial. Losing your helmet was stupidity, but losing that photograph, or those letters, that was like losing a part of your soul. I'd pat my pockets constantly, a nervous tick, making sure the hard edges of the tin that held Anna's picture were still there. I'd seen men go almost mad with grief after their packs were lost or destroyed, not over the spare socks or the rations, but over the little things. It was as if that last thread connecting them to humanity had been snipped. That's why the moments when we could openly celebrate these fragments of a normal life were so powerful, so sacred. I remember one time, deep in the Ukraine, we'd been on the move for days, living on stale bread and fear. Our uniforms were stiff with dirt and sweat. We were hollowy, jumpy. Then, France somehow produced a tin of jam. A single, beautiful, red tin of strawberry jam, looted from some abandoned dacha. It was like finding treasure. We gathered around, a circle of filthy, exhausted men, our breath fogging in the chill evening air. He opened it with his bayonet, and the smell, God, the smell was unbelievable. Sweet, fruity, a scent from another universe. He dipped his knife in and passed it to the man next to him. Each of us took a small taste, spreading the sticky sweetness on a piece of our hard tack. We didn't speak. The only sounds were the crackle of the small fire and the quiet, almost obscene sounds of pleasure we made as we tasted it. For those few minutes, the war disappeared. We weren't soldiers. We were just a group of boys, sharing something good. The jam tasted of summer, of gardens, of home. It erased the taste of blood and gunpowder. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated brotherhood, bought for the price of a tin of jam. In those moments, you realized what we were fighting to protect, and what was fighting to protect us from becoming. These fragments, these tiny, fragile pieces of a civilized life, were the only things keeping the animal inside at bay. The cold and the fear and the constant presence of death strip you down to your basest instincts. You become a creature of survival, all snarl and sinew. But then you'd taste that jam, or you'd look at that photograph, and you'd remember. You'd remember that you were a man who loved a woman, a man who enjoyed a good beer, a man who could appreciate a sunset without looking for enemy movement. That was the real battle, I think, not the one against the Russians, the one inside ourselves. And we fought it with whatever we had left in our pockets. You never really think about silence until you've lived through an artillery barrage. The noise. God, the noise is something that claws its way inside your skull, a physical thing that punches the air from your lungs and shakes the earth so deep you feel it in your teeth. It's a universe of pure, shattering sound. And then it stops. And that's when the real fear sets in. It's not the quiet you know from back home, the peaceful kind before you fall asleep. This is a ringing, hollow silence, a void that feels heavier than the noise. Your ears scream with a high-pitched whine, like a tea kettle that's about to burst, and inside that ringing is nothing. It's more unnerving than all the shells in the world. Your first instinct isn't to cheer, it's to check. You run your hands over your own body, patting your chest, your legs, making sure everything is still there, that the wetness you feel is just sweat and not something else. Then your hands fly to your rifle, the cold, oily metal, your fingers finding the bolt, making sure it's clear, it's a reflex, a prayer. And then you look to the man next to you. France in the hole with me, his face pale under the grime, his eyes wide white circles. You just look at each other and you don't say a word, you just give a little nod, and he nods back, and that's how you know you're both still alive for another few minutes. And then, slowly, like your ears are dipping back into the world, the other sounds come back. A gust of wind rustling the shredded leaves of a nearby birch tree. A single, stupid bird chirping somewhere as if the world hadn't just ended. And the sound of your own breathing, ragged and too loud, like you're ashamed of the air you're taking into your lungs. That's the silence we lived in, the deafening quiet that was always waiting on the other side of hell. And then came the wait. The war, they think, is all action, all charging and shooting. But it's not. It's mostly waiting. It's a mind-numbing, soul-crushing boredom that is its own special kind of torture. You'd sit in that foxhole for hours, days, the mud seeping through your trousers, your bones aching with a cold that felt permanent. We'd play games with whatever we had. A torn piece of map, we'd draw a grid and use pebbles for a makeshift Moohul game. We detail stories, the same stories over and over, about girls back home, about the best meal we ever ate, about stupid things we did as kids. Old Man Becker, he was maybe 35, but to us he was an old man. He could hum entire symphonies, just sotto voce, this quiet, vibrating hum that would sometimes be the only thing keeping me sane. But underneath it all always was this constant, low-grade anxiety, a buzzing in your veins. It was like waiting for a train you knew was coming, but you never knew when. You'd stare out across the torn-up earth between our lines and theirs, this no-man's-land of craters and shattered trees, and you just wait. Wait for the whistle of a mortar, the crack of a sniper's rifle, the shout from a sergeant. Your body was wound so tight you'd jump at the sound of a rat scurrying through the debris. You learned to hate the dawn because it meant another day of waiting to see if you'd live to see the dusk. In that stillness, you learned a whole new language, one without words. It was in the looks you exchanged with the veterans, the guys who'd been there since 41. A glance across the trench, a slight raise of an eyebrow that was a whole conversation. It said, well, we're still here. And this is bad, but we've seen worse. And keep your head down, kid, all at once. There was one time, after a particularly bloody scrap, there was a brief truce to collect the wounded. It was the strangest thing. You'd step out, your hands empty, and across the way they'd step out too. Russians, boys just like us, with the same tired, haunted look in their eyes. You'd be pulling a groaning comrade onto a stretcher, and you'd lock eyes with one of them, maybe 20 meters away, doing the same. And you'd share a silence that said, "I don't hate you, I just want to live, and tomorrow I will probably try to kill you." It messed with your head more than any propaganda ever could. And that's when the internal monologue would start, the questions that gnawed at you in the dark. Why are we here? What is this patch of frozen mud worth? Is my mother thinking of me right now? Will I be able to eat this disgusting dauerbrat tonight, or will I be lying out there in the dirt, food for the crows? You'd wonder if your nerve would hold, if the next time the shells came down, you'd be the one to crack, to start screaming and never stop. You saw it happen. A guy named Klaus just started laughing during a bombardment, a high, hysterical laugh, and then he stood up, arms spread wide, and well, he didn't have to wait anymore. So you found your small defiances, little acts of rebellion that reminded you that you were still a man, not just a cog in this bloody machine. You'd steal a moment, maybe when you were supposed to be cleaning your gun, to pull out a crumpled, dirty letter from your tunic pocket. It was from my fiancée, Lena. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times, the ink smudged from the rain and my filthy fingers. I didn't even need to read the words anymore. I had them memorized. Just holding it, smelling the faint, ghostly scent of the perfume she dabbed on it, that was enough. For 1 minute, I wasn't in Russia. I was back in my village, walking with her by the river. Or you just look at the sky. If the clouds broke, you'd look up at the stars. They were the same stars as back home. It was a comfort and a torment. It made the world feel small and impossibly large all at once. And the humor, you wouldn't believe the humor we had. It was black as pitch, born from the sheer absurdity of it all. We joke about the lousy food, calling the thin soup ersatz water and laughing. When a shell would land close and shower us with dirt, someone would quip, "Well, they're just trying to bury us early, save someone the trouble." It sounds terrible, I know, but if you didn't laugh, you'd cry, and crying felt too much like giving up. But it was in these moments of stillness, these pauses, that the war did its deepest work. It wasn't in the heat of the attack. That was pure adrenaline, an animal instinct to survive. No, it was in the quiet, waiting, boring moments that the war seeped into your bones, into your soul, and you knew with a cold certainty that you would never, ever be free of it. You'd feel it settle in, a permanent resident in the house of your mind. I remember one afternoon. It was a rare, almost warm day in the autumn of '43. The mud had frozen just enough to hold your weight without sucking your boots off. The front had been quiet for nearly 2 days, which was a lifetime. The silence wasn't the ringing kind, but a thick, sleepy silence. I was on watch, leaning against the dirt wall of the trench, my helmet tipped forward. My buddy Helmut was asleep next to me, his head on his pack, snoring softly. He had a photo of his newborn son, a child he'd never seen, pinned inside his helmet liner. I could see it peeking out. The sun felt weak but good on my face, and for a few minutes I just existed. I watched a beetle struggle through a blade of grass. I listened to the rhythmic sound of Helmut's breathing. I thought about nothing. Not the war, not home, not fear. Just the beetle, the sun, the breathing. It was the most peaceful I had felt in years. And then, from the Russian side, faintly, I heard a harmonic. It was an accordion. Someone over there was playing a folk tune, something slow and sad and beautiful. It drifted across the dead ground, this fragile thread of music. No one shot. No one shouted. On both sides, I imagine, men just stopped and listened. For 3 minutes there was no war, just this shared, stolen moment of music under the same sun. Then it stopped. And the silence came back, but this time it was different. It was a silence full of the memory of the music, a silence that made the return to reality feel even more brutal. That's the thing they never tell you. It's the moments of beauty that break your heart more than the moments of terror. The terror just makes you animal. The beauty reminds you that you're a man with a heart that can still break, and that's a dangerous thing to remember out here. The waiting always ended the same way. A flare would go up, blood-red against the twilight sky, or a runner would come slipping and sliding down the trench line, his face grim, passing the word. "They're coming, prepare for attack." And the waiting would be over, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The boredom would vanish, and your body would thrum with a terrible energy. You'd check your rifle again, make sure your bayonet was fixed tight, your grenades were handy. You'd look at the men around you, your kameraden. You'd see the fear in their eyes, and you knew they saw it in yours. There were no grand speeches, not really. Maybe the Feldwebel would just say, "All right, boys, eyes open," and that was it. Then you'd peer over the parapet, your heart hammering against your ribs like it wanted to escape, and you'd see them, dark shapes moving in the distance, getting closer. The world would shrink to the patch of ground in front of your rifle sights. Noise would start again, first the ripping sound of the MG42, then the cracks of rifles, the crump of mortars. The silence was gone, shattered. And in a strange way, it was almost a relief. The waiting was over. Now there was only doing. But in the back of your mind, even as you aimed and fired, as the world dissolved into chaos and smoke, and the metallic taste of fear, you knew that if you survived this, the silence would be waiting for you again. And it would be heavier and more deafening than before. Because now it would be filled with the ghosts of the men who didn't make it, the echoes of the screams, and the memory of a Russian accordion playing a sad song across a field of the dead. You learn the rules fast out here, or you don't learn anything at all. They don't teach you this stuff in training, back in those neat barracks with the polished floors and the shouting sergeants who thought war was about shiny boots and straight lines. No, this is a different education. It gets written on you, scar by scar, frozen night by frozen night. It's etched into the back of your eyes so you see it every time you blink. And it all starts with your hands. These hands, they don't look like they used to. The skin is like old leather, cracked and stained, nails always black with dirt no matter how hard you scrub. The knuckles are swollen, the fingers permanently curved a little, from gripping the rifle, from digging, from the cold. You look at these hands, and you don't see the hands of the boy who left his village in 41. You see a map of 3 years in this godforsaken place. You see the unwritten rules of survival. The first rule, the one that gets whispered to the new replacements with wide, scared eyes, is simple. Keep your head down, your rifle clean, and your entrenching tool closer than your own mother. The rifle is your life. Sure, everyone knows that. A jammed bolt in a firefight is a death sentence. You learn to clean it in the dark, by feel, the smell of gun oil mixing with the stench of wet wool and mud. But the entrenching tool, that little folding shovel, that's what keeps you alive long enough to use the rifle. You learn to love the bite of the blade into the earth, the rhythm of digging. A good hole, deep enough to stand in, with a firing step, that's the difference between seeing the sunrise and being rolled into a blanket by the medics. Me and my buddy, France, we got so fast we could dig a 2-man foxhole in 10 minutes, sweat pouring down our backs even in the cold, our breath puffing like steam engines. You learn to sleep in that hole, but you never really sleep. You doze in shifts, with one ear always open. It's not the big noises that scare you. The artillery barrages are too loud to sleep through anyway. It's the small sounds, the specific crunch of a boot on frozen snow that isn't one of ours. The faint click of a Marcin Nagant bolt sliding home in the darkness just beyond the wire. That sound, you learn, is the last sound many men ever hear. Your heart hammers against your ribs and you're wide awake, rifle cold against your cheek, staring into the black, waiting for the shadows to move. And the men in the holes next to you, they become more than comrades. They become your left and right hands. You learn to recognize the sound of their coughing, the way they stir their stew, the shape of their silhouette against the skyline. I knew Klaus, on my left, had a wife back in Hamburg named Lena because he showed me her picture so many times the edges were soft and smudged. I knew he snored softly when he finally managed to sleep. And I knew that if I heard a cry from his hole in the middle of the night, I'd be over the parapet without a second thought, because that's the rule. You trust them with your life, and they trust you with theirs. It's a deeper bond than any friendship back home. It's forged in shared terror and shared hunger. We de-huddle in the trench during a lull, passing around a single cigarette, each man taking one deep drag, and for a minute the world wasn't so bad. That little bit of warmth that shared vice, it was a tiny piece of humanity we clung to. The dark humor, too. You have to laugh or you'll go mad. When a shell lands close and covers you in mud, you don't scream, you joke that you've just had a free bath. When the rain turns the trench into a river, you say you always wanted a waterfront property. It's a brittle, sharp kind of laughter, but it keeps the fear from swallowing you whole. Then there are the other rules, the rules for killing. They never prepared us for this. In training, they showed you a silhouette and told you to aim for center mass. Out here, you learn why. You learn because you've seen what happens if you miss. You've seen a man take a round in the gut and writhe in the mud for what feels like hours, screaming for his mother until his voice gives out. So you learn to make your shots count. It's not about heroism or medals. It's a brutal mechanical arithmetic. Him or me. Before a charge, there's this hollow feeling in your stomach, a cold emptiness that has nothing to do with hunger. Your mouth is dry as dust. You check your rifle for the 10th time, your fingers fumbling numb. The officer blows the whistle, and the sound is so small against the roaring in your ears. Then you go over the top, and something else takes over. You stop being a man named Erich who liked to read books and walk in the forest. You become a machine. Your legs pump, your breath comes in ragged gasps, your world shrinks to the few meters in front of your bayonet. You see the enemy faces now, not just shapes in the distance. And sometimes, in the chaos, your eyes lock with one of theirs, just for a second. You see the same fear, the same exhaustion, the same young man who probably doesn't want to be here either. It's a strange, fleeting connection, a silent acknowledgement that you are both about to decide the other's fate. Then one of you falls, and the moment is gone, washed away by the roar of machine guns and the smell of cordite. Afterwards, when the adrenaline drains away, you feel nothing at first, just a heavy numbness. Then later, in the quiet of the hole, it all comes crashing down. The faces, the eyes, the silence where the screaming was. You build a wall in your mind, you have to, brick by brick, to push those memories behind it. Otherwise, you'd lose your mind completely. But the enemy wasn't always the man across the field. The land itself was our fiercest opponent. Russia, God, Russia is so big. It feels like it goes on forever, this vast, flat, cruel country. You learn new rules just to survive it. You learn to find water that won't give you the runs, to spot the edible roots, to move through a forest so silently you become a ghost. The silence becomes your ally. You learn to read the wind, to understand how sound travels differently over snow. You learn to see without being seen, to become a part of the landscape. But the winter, nothing could prepare you for the Russian winter. It's an enemy more lethal than any Soviet division. The cold gets into your bones and stays there. It's a deep, primal ache that no amount of clothing can truly defeat. You learn to sleep curled up like a dog with two other men for warmth, your breath freezing on the blankets, your mustache turning to a block of ice. The frostbite. I saw men lose fingers, toes, whole feet, because they couldn't get their boots on fast enough in a surprise attack. The worst sound wasn't gunfire. It was the sound of a man weeping quietly because he knew his blackened, dead fingers would have to be cut off in the morning. You'd rub your own hands together, blow on them, trying to keep the blood flowing, your skin cracked and bleeding. The cold made the metal of your rifle burn to the touch, and if you were foolish enough to touch it with your bare tongue, well, that was a lesson you only learned once. The landscape was dead, white, and silent, and it felt like it was slowly, patiently, trying to erase us from existence. And through it all, you had to survive yourself. That was the hardest part. The fear is a constant companion, a cold stone in your gut. The homesickness is a physical pain, a dull ache for a warm bed, your mother's cooking, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of a girl's laughter that wasn't tinged with hysteria. You learn to build that wall in your mind I mentioned. You compartmentalize. You put the horror of today in a box and lock it away, because if you don't, you'll never be able to function tomorrow. You think about home, but not too much, because it hurts too badly. You learn to accept that luck is the only real strategy. No amount of skill, no amount of courage can stop a random shell from landing in your hole. You see it happen. One minute a man is joking with you, sharing a piece of hardtack. The next minute there's just a crater and pieces. And you know deep down that it could just as easily have been you. So you develop little superstitions. You always put your left boot on first. You never light 3 cigarettes on one match. You carry a talisman, a lucky charm. Mine was a smooth, grey stone from a riverbank near my home. I'd rub it in my pocket during a bombardment, feeling its cool, solid surface, pretending for a second I was back by that river, skipping stones with my brother. It's childish, but it helps. It grounds you. You accept that tomorrow is never guaranteed. You live hour by hour, minute by minute. You learn to find a strange, terrible beauty in the small moments, where the sun sets over the ruined landscape, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, the surprising sight of a single, stubborn flower pushing through the mud in the spring. Those moments, they remind you that there's still a world outside of this madness. And that brings me to the final rule, the most important one. The rule that kept you digging, kept you fighting, kept you building those walls in your mind. Do whatever it takes to see the faces of your family again. That's the thought that gets you through the night. It's not about patriotism or ideology anymore. That stuff gets stripped away in the first winter, frozen to death in the snow. It's about the photograph you keep in your breast pocket, the one that's worn soft at the edges. It's about your mother's face, your father's handshake, your little sister's smile. For me, it was my fiancée, Greta. I'd close my eyes and try to remember the exact scent of her hair, the sound of her voice, the way her hand felt in mine. I promised her I'd come back. That promise became my reason for being. It was the fuel that kept me moving when my body had nothing left to give. When the fear was so thick you could taste it, when the cold was so deep you wanted to just lie down and sleep, you'd think of those faces. You do things you never thought yourself capable of, terrible things, just for one more day, one more chance to make it back to them. You become hard, cold, a survivor, because the boy you used to be wouldn't last a week out here. This place, these 3 years, they change your hands, they change your face, they change your soul. But somewhere deep inside, underneath all the dirt and the scars and the hardened shell, that boy is still there, clinging to the one rule that matters, the one rule that means more than all the others combined. Go home. Just go home. You look in the mirror sometimes and you don't see yourself. Not the you that you remember anyway. The face that stares back is a stranger's face, etched with lines that weren't there 3 years ago, weathered by 1,000 winds that didn't blow from home. The eyes are the worst part. They're not your eyes. They're the eyes of an old man, hollowed out, like the windows of a bombed-out house. You see that look sometimes in the faces of the new replacements, the ones who just got here with their clean uniforms and their full cheeks and that nervous excitement they try to hide. They don't have the look yet. The look doesn't come from one battle or one scare. It seeps into you, day after day, month after month, until it's just part of you, this permanent shadow behind the iris. It's the first thing you notice in another veteran, that shared emptiness, a silent understanding that passes between you without a single word. And the flinching, God, the flinching. A car backfires in the street, a door slams too hard, and your whole body tenses up. Your heart hammers against your ribs like it's trying to get out. And for a split second you're not in a quiet room, you're back there, bracing for the impact, the world shrinking to the dirt in front of your face. Your eyes, without you even telling them to, start scanning the horizon, looking for the telltale flash of a muzzle or the dip in the ground where a machine gun nest could be hiding. It's an instinct now, deeper than thought. Peace feels loud. Silence is the loudest noise of all because your head fills it with everything you're trying to forget. The letters from home, they were like messages from another planet. My mother would write about the apple tree in the backyard, finally bearing fruit, or my little sister's graduation, or the funny thing the neighbor's dog did. And I'd read them by the flickering light of a candle in some filthy bunker, the smell of damp wool and unwashed bodies thick in the air, the distant thump of artillery a constant bass note in our lives. Those letters were precious. Don't get me wrong, we'd fight over the mail call, but they created this impossible distance. How could I possibly write back? How do you describe the taste of fear, a metallic coppery taste that stays in your mouth for days? How do you explain the sound a man makes when he's hit, not in the movies, but for real, a sound that's part surprise, part animal pain, and then just nothing? You can't. So you write lies. Dear Muddy, all is well. We are holding our position. The food is adequate. Adequate. That meant a piece of black bread so hard you could hammer nails with it, and a thin stew that was mostly hot water. You build a wall brick by brick with those cheerful, ignorant letters. The people on the other side of that wall love you. They're your reason for surviving, but you can never let them cross over to where you really are. It would destroy them. And when you finally do come home, you walk into a room full of laughing, smiling people, and you feel like a ghost. They see your uniform, they slap you on the back, they call you a hero, but they don't see the mud of the Volkov still caked on your boots. They don't smell the smoke and the blood that's stuck in your nostrils forever. You look at them, and you feel more kinship with the Russian soldier you faced across a frozen field, the one whose eyes you met for a second before you both ducked back into your holes. You and him, you shared the same rain, the same fear, the same desperate desire to just see the next sunrise. That's a bond that civilians can never understand. The ghosts are the worst at night. That's when they come visiting. You're safe in a warm bed, the war is over, but your mind never got the message. I'll wake up in a cold sweat, my throat raw from shouting a warning to Klaus, to Eugen, to the boys in my squad. Incoming, I'll scream, but I'm screaming into a pillow in a quiet bedroom, and the men I'm trying to save have been dead for years. Klaus, he was just a kid from Hamburg, had a picture of his girlfriend he'd look at every night before he tried to sleep. A shell landed right on his foxhole. We didn't even find enough to bury. Eugen, an old hand, a carpenter before the war, he could fix anything, always had a joke, even when things were at their worst. A sniper got him one morning while he was brewing coffee. Just a single crack, and he slumped over, the pot tipping into the fire with a hiss. These men, they were better men than me. Why did I get to come home? Why did I get to have a warm bed and bad dreams when they got a cold grave and nothing at all? That guilt, it's a heavier burden than any pack I ever carried. It sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And the memories, they don't come when you call them, but they ambush you when you least expect it. Smell of wet earth after a rainstorm can suddenly send me right back to the trenches outside Leningrad, the mud so deep it would suck the boots right off your feet. The sound of a certain kind of diesel engine, like the old truck my neighbor has, and I'm right back there, listening for the squeaky track of a T-34 coming through the fog. You're never really free of it. The war is a parasite that lives inside you, and it reminds you it's there with every smell, every sound, every quiet moment. And now there's peace. It's what we dreamed of, prayed for through all those frozen nights and bloody days. But it feels wrong. The silence is deafening. You get so used to the constant noise of war, the rumble, the crumps, the staccato of machine guns that, when it stops, the absence of sound is itself a noise. It's a pressure on your ears. You feel useless. My hands, look at them now. They're clean. The dirt is gone from under the nails, but they feel foreign. For 3 years, these hands had a purpose. They held a Mauser. They dug a hole in the hard, frozen ground, a hole that might be the difference between living and dying. They helped drag a wounded comrade to safety, feeling his blood soak through your sleeve. They shook with cold and fear, but they were always doing something. Now they hold a coffee cup. They turn the page of a newspaper. They feel soft. They feel like a civilian's hands. And I look at them sometimes, and I don't recognize them any more than I recognize the face in the mirror. This peaceful world, it's a world we fought for, but it's not a world we built. We were experts in destruction, not construction. We knew how to take a life, how to dig a grave, how to survive another day in hell. What do we know about peace? What use are we here? You walk down the street and you see people worrying about trivial things, and a part of you wants to scream, to shake them, to tell them what real problems are. But you don't. You just smile that hollow smile and keep walking, a stranger in your own homeland. I remember the day it really started, not the big invasion day with the banners and the speeches, but the day the East truly got its claws into me. It was outside Smolensk. The autumn rains had turned everything to a soupy, grey-brown mud they called Rasputitsa. Our truck got bogged down axle deep, and we had to march. The rain wasn't like home rain. It was a cold, penetrating drizzle that found its way through every layer of wool, right down to your skin. Your feet were never dry. You developed this trench foot, where your skin would go white and wrinkled and then just peel off in sheets. The smell, God, the smell of the front. It's a mixture you never forget. Wet wool, diesel fumes, cordite from the rifles, the coppery tang of blood, and underneath it all, the sweet, sickly smell of death. It clung to everything, your clothes, your hair, your food. You taste it on your tongue. At first it made you gag, but after a while you just got used to it. That was the first sign you were changing, when the unimaginable became normal. We were green then, us boys from the 41 class. We still had some fire in our bellies, still believed the propaganda about a quick victory. That didn't last long. The first time you come under real artillery bombardment, it shatters every illusion you ever had. It's not like in the movies where guys run around and dive for cover. It's pure, unadulterated terror. The world explodes. The ground heaves and bucks under you like a living thing. The sound isn't outside you. It's inside your skull, a pressure that feels like your ears are going to burst. Dirt and rock and shrapnel whistle through the air, and you press yourself into the mud, praying to a God you're not sure you believe in anymore, making promises you know you'll never keep if you live. You shit yourself, you piss yourself, and you don't even care, because the only thing that matters is becoming one with the earth, making yourself so small that the shells will pass over you. And in the lulls, you hear the screams. Not the brave screams of movie soldiers, but the high, pitiful screams of boys calling for their mothers. That sound, it haunts you more than the explosions. After a barrage, the silence is almost as terrifying because it's filled with those cries. And you look at the guy next to you, his face as white as a sheet, his eyes wide with the same animal fear you feel, and you don't need to say anything. That shared terror, that's what forged the real bonds, stronger than any basic training camaraderie. The Russians. We were taught to think of them as subhuman, Untermenschen. But out there, in the mud and the snow, they were just men. Tough, relentless, miserable men, just like us. I remember one time, during a lull in the fighting near a village that was nothing but burnt-out shells, we were holed up on one side of a river, them on the other. It was so cold your breath froze in your mustache, and your rifle bolt would seize up if you didn't work it constantly. We could see their figures moving around on the other bank, shadows in the twilight. And then one of them started singing. It was a sad, slow song, his voice carrying cleanly across the frozen water. Nobody fired. Nobody moved. We just listened. One of our guys, Hansi, he was from a farm and had a decent voice. He started singing a folk song back, something about the mountains. For a few minutes there was no war, just these two young men singing to each other across a frozen river, a tiny piece of shared humanity in all that madness. Then an officer showed up and shouted at us to shut up, and the spell was broken. But in that moment I saw him. Not a Bolshevik, not an enemy, just another poor bastard stuck in this frozen hell, 1,000 miles from home, just wanting to survive. That was the truth they never put on the posters. The winters. Nobody can describe the Russian winter if they haven't lived through it. It's a different kind of cold. It's an aggressive cold that attacks you, that seeks out every weakness. Your breath freezes on the scarf over your face, forming a mask of ice. Your fingers and toes would go numb, and you'd live in constant fear of frostbite. We didn't have the proper gear, not for that. The grease in your rifle would freeze solid. Engines of our vehicles wouldn't start unless we kept fires burning under the oil pans all night. We de-huddled together for warmth in our dugouts, 4 or 5 men to a hole, listening to the wind howl like a banshee outside. You'd wake up and your hair would be frozen to the dirt wall. The dead didn't even rot. They just froze solid, standing up sometimes like grotesque statues, a grim reminder that waited for the spring thaw. That's when the dark humor would come out. It was our only defense. You had to laugh or you go mad. We'd give names to the particularly nasty shelling spots. We'd make bets on stupid things, like how many lice you could pick off your shirt in a minute. Lice, that was another plague. They were everywhere in your seams, in your hair, driving you insane with the itching. You'd spend hours by a candle, trying to pick them off and pop them between your fingernails. It was a disgusting, degrading business, but it was something to do, a small battle you could actually win. And the hunger, the constant, gnawing hunger. Our supply lines were stretched to breaking point. A hot meal was a rare luxury. Most days it was hardtack, some canned meat that was mostly fat, and if we were lucky, a thin soup. We'd loot whatever we could from the abandoned village, a potato, a chicken, anything. I remember once we found a cache of beets. We were so hungry we ate them raw, our faces and hands stained red with the juice, looking like vampires. You dream about food, not fancy food, just a simple meal at your mother's table, the smell of fresh bread. The hunger hollows you out from the inside, just like the fear hollows out your soul. Then there were the moments of pure, unthinking bravery, not the kind they give medals for, but the kind that happens in a split second. My friend Werner, he was a quiet guy, a bookkeeper from Dresden, never said much. One day we were pushing through a forest, and we walked right into a minefield. The guy in front of me, a new kid named Schmidt, he triggered it. The blast threw him back, his leg a bloody mess. He was screaming, writhing in agony, right in the middle of the field. We were all pinned down, sniper fire zipping overhead. Nobody knew what to do. Then Werner, without a word, just got up and started walking slowly, carefully into that field. He didn't run. He placed each foot with agonizing slowness, his eyes fixed on the ground. We watched, holding our breath. Every second felt like an hour. He reached Schmidt, slung him over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, and started back step by careful step. He made it out. He saved that kid's life. A week later, Werner was killed by a random mortar round while he was eating his breakfast. There's no sense to it, no justice. The best men were taken, and the rest of us, the lucky ones, the cowards maybe, we were left to carry the memory of their sacrifice. That's the burden you carry. Why him? Why not me? When the end finally came, when the word went down the line that it was over, there was no celebration, no cheering, just a profound, exhausted silence. We were in what was left of a farmyard in Poland. We just looked at each other, my surviving buddies, men I'd known for 3 years, men I'd trusted with my life. Their faces were as grimy and tired as my own. We didn't hug. We didn't say much. We just sat there, too tired to even feel relief. The war had ended, but we knew, I think, that for us, it would never truly be over. The fighting outside had stopped, but the war inside was just beginning. The long journey home was a blur of defeated men, of shattered columns, of a world in ruins. And then you're here. You take off the uniform. You try to pick up the threads of a life that feels like it belonged to someone else. You look at your clean, soft hands, and you remember what they used to do. You see the hollow eyes in the mirror, and you wonder if the boy who went to war is still in there somewhere, buried under the ice of Russia, and the mud of the Ukraine, and the ghosts of all the friends he left behind. You have to believe he is. You have to have that quiet hope that maybe, with time, the sun will warm that frozen ground inside you, and something new might grow. But for now, you just learn to live with the hollow stare. You learn to live with the man the war made you.